Our Around the World segment tonight, a global risk analysis. The world is in chaos. Iran is racing towards a nuclear missile. Syria is using chemical weapons on its own people. And North Korea is on the brink of a total meltdown. But should we even be surprised after 8 years of the Obama administration's bowing to foreign leaders instead of leading the world? Joining me now is global risk analyst John Sitilides. John, good to see you.
Great to be with you, Liz.
Listen, John, there's a lot of turmoil domestically here in our country the last couple days, the last 8 days, actually. I don't need to tell you that. But that does not mean that the risky situations, the chaos around the world has stopped just because America's having some domestic issues at this time. And I want to ask you, I mean, you're a global risk analyst. What area of the world most concerns you right now? There's a lot going on.
Look, no doubt about it, the Middle East remains the cauldron that is of most immediate concern. But I think we're going to have some very serious issues in the Pacific Rim region with the North Korean belligerence of the last several weeks. And there's always the factor regarding Russia and the pressures it's placing on the European Union and on NATO. But primarily I see Syria, Libya, Egypt, Iran, of course, and North Korea as the main drivers of the national security agenda for the next several months.
Right. And talk to me about North Korea. This is a story, we've been covering North Korea a lot. I mean, it's in a sense hard to take the North Korean leader seriously because of who he is, but when you see their capacity, it becomes downright frightening, I think, sometimes, John. They've tested missiles, ballistic missiles, the last couple weeks. I mean, how close are they to being able to launch a nuclear warhead?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer right now, Liz, because our intelligence is so poor on what is happening inside of North Korea. But the best estimates are that we know, of course, that they have nuclear weapons. They may have anywhere from 8 to 20 nuclear weapons right now, and they may have as many as 60 to 100 in the next 3 to 4 years. But the tremendous danger for the United States, Liz, is if they're able to miniaturize those nuclear weapons and place them on the ICBMs, the intercontinental ballistic missiles, which they've been testing one after the other in the last several months, to be able to strike at the American homeland, the continental United States. And President Trump, as candidate Trump, made very clear he will never allow that to happen. So either we're able to work out an arrangement with the Chinese, or we're going to be taking unilateral actions, or perhaps with the Japanese and the South Koreans, but they're very vulnerable, and making sure that North Korea never attains that nuclear attack capability against the heartland of the United States.
Right. Like you said, that's something that candidate Trump promised time and time again on the campaign trail. A week or so ago, maybe this was 10 days ago, President Trump said that under the right circumstances, he'd be willing to talk to the leader of North Korea. North Korea responded to that a couple days ago and said pretty much the same thing. They mirrored it. They echoed it. They said under the right circumstances, they'd be willing to talk to the United States. Do you foresee that ever happening?
I really don't, and I think it has more to do with the North Korean regime than anything else. I mean, Donald Trump is somebody who's transacted with business leaders and government leaders throughout his career, and I think he just sees this as an opportunity, again, under the quote-unquote right conditions, to have some type of an arrangement with the North Koreans where they agree to denuclearize their armed forces in exchange for some type of accommodation on food and oil and other things they need to keep their desperate economy afloat. The problem is that Kim Jong-un is completely unreliable. He's never kept any of his agreements, neither with the Clinton or the Bush or the Obama administrations. And we also don't know what's driving this man mentally, to be very frank. So I think it's a very nice gesture on the part of President Trump, but it's very doubtful to see those two leaders meeting anytime in the near future.
Right. And pivoting to another country that I think doesn't keep their agreements with the global community or with the United States, let's look at Iran for a second. So they've been testing ballistic missiles as well, sort of paralleling what North Korea is doing. In my opinion, and I think you and I talked about this the last time, John, that North Korea may actually be parroting what happened in Iran in hopes of getting a similar nuclear deal with the United States here. But Iran's been hiding the testing of their missiles behind their space program. They say they're launching 2 satellites, but I think everyone around the world knows that they don't really have any interest in exploring space, that they're doing that because they want to test the capacity of their missiles.
You're absolutely right there, Liz, and keep in mind that the technology that's used to send satellites into space and keep them in orbit are very close to the kind of technology that's required to send ballistic missiles into space and around the globe to strike at a distant target like the United States from Iran. This is a country with one of the largest oil and natural gas reserves in the world. They have absolutely no need for nuclear energy, and they've continued to deny that they're developing a nuclear weapons program when everyone in the world knows that they are lying on their to the max here. And there's been no sanctions whatsoever of any meaningful kind, and especially now with the Obama agreement in place, which President Trump has agreed to in terms of sanctions relief extended, I think earlier today, I believe more than anything else to not interfere with the very conditioned elections coming up in 2 weeks, whereas candidates who have been permitted by the supreme leader of Iran are facing down against each other in a couple of days. And also, I think, not to preempt any of the discussions that President Trump plans to have with Saudi and Israeli leaders in the Middle East. But Iran and North Korea, Liz, are involved in a black market in ballistic missile technology. We need to be very clear about this. They're helping each other out with equal aims towards trying to defeat American aims, goals, and interests in their respective regions.
Right. Well, and just to bring it back to, I guess, domestic politics for a second, this is what happens when you bow to foreign leaders. This is what happens. You know, we can look at all the different countries. We can look at Libya, Syria, Iran, Iraq. We can see the proliferation of ISIS, what's happening in North Korea. This is what happens when you threaten Syria with a red line and then don't follow through. This is what happens when you give Russia an insulting red reset button. This is what happens when you treat Kim Jong-un like a crazy fat kid instead of someone who has in his possession nuclear weapons. There's some blame, I think, to lay at the feet of President Obama and some lessons to learn from that.
Well, clearly what we saw in the previous administration, Liz, was a foreign policy under President Obama based largely on hesitancy and irresolution, and something called strategic patience, which basically means we'll do nothing while our adversaries proceed with advancing their own goals and interests inimical to ours. What I see with President Trump is not so much a doctrine yet. I mean, he's only a couple of months into his administration, but I do see the sense of an armed diplomacy strategy in the Middle East and in Asia. We will, of course, pursue every diplomatic approach possible, but this time we're backing it up with the possibility of armed force in order to persuade or coerce other countries to do what we think needs to be done. And you see resolution and you see persistence in Afghanistan and Syria with the major military strikes there. And I think that'll be the pattern for the Trump administration in the coming months.
Right, because I think other nations or other rogue groups, even terror groups, terror-funding nations, know under President Trump that he's actually going to follow through on his threats. He's not just going to back away like President Obama did. So maybe